Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're back in War Thunder looking at a Tier 1 Premium Battle Rating 1.3 Japanese heavy tank, the Rogo. Now this is another tank which was added in update 1.67, and it doesn't really surprise me that the Rogo comes along, because if we look at other nations, at around 1.3 BR we have these interesting heavy tanks which are either prototypes or just things which were made before World War II, and it's kind of a nice premium to have. It's also a normally a very large vehicle, so it's, you know, Gaijin put a lot of work into them, so therefore they can charge quite a high price, and it also makes them quite a unique thing to give to people as a premium. So for the British you have the A1 E1 Independent. For the Russians, you have the T-35. For the Germans, you have the NB-FZ or the Neubau Fahrzeug. You'd probably say it somehow else. And unfortunately, the Americans don't have one yet. So they're probably going to be the guys who get eventually their 1.3 heavy tank, depending on what it is. So, the Rogo. Is it a good tank? I mean, it's not bad. It's your pretty standard heavy tank at Tier 1. It doesn't really have the armor capabilities to really stop anything. The most armor you're going to get out of this thing from the front is about 30mm, and because it has some very large flat areas, that's generally where people are going to be aiming for. So, you know, it's not really going to stop a lot. One of the good things about the T-35 and the A1E1 is the fact that they have a lot of crew in them, so it's actually very hard to knock them out wholesale. And the Rogo is slightly in this way as well, but not to the same extent. So it does have 6 crew in it: a driver, 2 gunners on each of the guns, the 70mm and the 37mm. It has a commander, a loader, and a machine gunner at the back. So, kind of similar to the LVT, where it has the LVT has the 2 machine gunners on the back. So, if crew does get knocked out in the turret, you can basically get those machine gunners into your turret, keep your gunners firing. So, with 6 crew, if you hit the turrets, then you still have 3 crew members left, and you also still have a 37mm, which is pretty deadly at the battle rating of 1.3. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Looking at the X-ray, this thing is made of ammunition. So wherever there isn't crew members, you have ammunition. And once again, this is a standard thing with these heavy tanks. They take a hell of a lot of ammunition. 100 rounds of 70mm and 150 of 37mm. The engine block is huge, not as big as the A1E1 Independence though, and it does take up quite a large portion of the back of the tank, so that's a nice juicy target to shoot at. Because you have the top turrets, you do have 360 degrees of rotation on that 70mm. The 37mm is housed in a smaller turret just below the top one, and it has about 180 degrees of turn. The unfortunate thing with the Rogo is that it doesn't have a forward-firing machine gun. The only machine gun it has, which is operational at this moment in time, is the machine gun on its arse. So, and it's your typical 7.7 Type 97 Japanese machine gun, so quite low velocity, not really a lot of penetration, and not a very large clip. So it's kind of useless. It's nice to see that it works though. I wonder if at any point we'll get the machine guns on the back of the turrets working, because the Rogo does have one. It's very similar to something you'd see on and I believe the KV-85 has one too, where it has like a back machine gun, maybe to ward off infantry members trying to get on the tank. But overall, one of the big issues with tanks like this, especially in realistic, is that they are massive targets for aircraft. And if we look at the armor on the top of this thing, you're looking at 13mm, and on top of the main turret, 8mm of armor. The engine deck is at 13. So people are going to go through you all day, every day, even at 1.3. Their bombs are going to hit, you're going to get set on fire a lot, and all this wonderful stuff. So let's look at the guns. The 70mm itself actually is kind of an interesting gun. It has pretty decent penetration for 1.3 at nearly 50 millimeters, and it also has APHE rounds, which have a decent amount of TNT in them at 170 grams. So if you hit and penetrate a machine in front of you, because of the general size of a lot of tier 1 vehicles, where they're kind of small, you're pretty much going to kill it. Generally they have 2 or 3 or maybe 4 crew at a stretch, so if you pen the front of them, you're generally going to take out about 3 crew members, and with a 70 millimeter round with 4.4 kilograms of projectile mass, you are going to take out people. You're going to do a pretty good job at that, and with a penetration value of around 50 millimeters, you shouldn't really have too much issues penning anything at this BR. There will be a few tanks, such as the other heavy tanks, that you will struggle with, but the main issue with the 70mm is that its muzzle velocity being at around 300 meters per second means that you're going to have to get used to looping those shots. The HE shell is pretty much useless, with 5mm of penetration. It's not really worth getting that extra 80 grams of explosive mass, and they basically have the same muzzle velocity, so you might as well stick with the APHE. The 37mm is kind of a different story. It nearly has the same penetration as the 70 at 44mm at most, but generally ranging around the mid-30s. The interesting thing about this 37 is that it actually has quite a high muzzle velocity at 575 meters per second, so if you want to try and engage people at long range and they don't really have a lot of armor, the 37 might be the way to go for at least ranging a target and just trying to hit them. Because even though your armor is not great, with, as I said, the most about maybe 30-35 on the flat plates where people are going to aim at, it can still hold away or hold against some shots which are going to come from long range. So you can maybe use that little turret in the front to try and do that. Another great thing about these guns is that they actually have pretty good gun depression at 10 degrees, which is kind of needed when you are such a tall tank. The Rogo is huge, just like the other tier 1 heavy tanks that we have in game. I mean, the A1E1 is incredibly long, and the T-35 is incredibly long and tall. Well, the Rogo is maybe slightly shorter, it may be as long. I'm not sure, I've never seen them side by side, but it's definitely incredibly tall. So that gun depression helps a hell of a lot. Another thing that's kind of going for it, which is something I don't really talk about, is the price of it as the premium. It sits at 1,370 Golden Eagles, and then when we look at the Independent and the T-35, they both sit at 2,100 Golden Eagles, and the NBFZ sits at 1,750. So if you're just looking for a heavy tank at tier 1 around the BR of 1.3, the Rogo is the cheapest that you're going to get. Does that mean it's worse than the others? I mean, they're all slightly different in their own ways. I would probably say the A1E1 is probably the worst tank when we look at these heavies, because it only has one gun which is useful, where the other tanks, even the NBFZ, it has a 75 and a 37. The T-35 is gun to the teeth with 176 and 245s. And the A1E1 unfortunately only gets that 47mm, which has the APHE shell. So the A1E1 doesn't have as much firepower as the rest, and its armor does not compensate for that. And it's also incredibly long, so people will generally just come behind it and shoot it in the arse, and there's not really a lot people can do about it apart from try and fire with the Vickers. So overall, it's nice that it's a little bit cheaper. I wonder why they've gone for that. Maybe in their minds they believe that the Rogo is not as good tank as the others, or because the others have been around for a longer time, maybe they're just trying to give it a little discount for players who are new to the game. It's also one of the first premium Japanese tanks. I mean, we don't really have a lot right now. We have the Hargo Commander, which, you know, it's just a Hargo with a skin, the Chiha shotgun, which is really interesting with the short barrel 120, and the Chinu 2, which is the other most recent one with the long barreled 75 on it. So the Rogo is nice to see, and once again, this does mean that every nation at 1.3 now has a heavy tank at 1.3 apart from America. So maybe in the next update we'll see one for America. Is this better than its competitors? Well, at 1.3 we have the Type 94, the Chiha, the Kini, and the Kami. The Kami is probably the worst tank in game. It could have a BR of 0 and it would still be useless. The Kini is actually not too bad. You can hide it in corners and basically just be an arse with it. The Chiha, even though its armor isn't great, I really like its gun, the 57 Type 97, even though it's got quite low velocity. But the Kingmaker at this BR, which unfortunately happens quite a lot for most nations, is the Type 94, the SPAA. Mounted with a 20mm and 45mm of penetration, it can pretty much decimate anything that comes near it, including all of the supposed heavy tanks that we have at this BR. The only one which could kind of stand up to it is the T-35, but if you shoot it in the flat plate in the front, once again only 30mm of armor, so the T-94 should go through that. So do you put it in your standard lineup? Yeah, I think you can. You would replace the light tank or the Horo, the tank destroyer, with it. So you would run the Chiha, the Type 94, and the Rogo. And I think the Rogo can definitely be more useful than the Kini and the Kami, but it comes up to playstyle. If you like trying to be some kind of wall pushing forward and not minding getting hit too much, then the Rogo is the way to go. If you want to be a bit more sneaky, maybe flank around, I'd definitely go for the Kimi. Or the Kini, sorry. Something just to mention is the fact that it's impossible to turn this thing if it has 0 speed. So if you are at a standstill somewhere and you need to turn to face an enemy, that's not going to happen. You have to build up some speed in it before it will allow you to turn. Just because it's just one of those massive tanks that takes a lot of power to turn. So doing it at 10 kilometers an hour is going to be a hell of a lot easier than doing it starting at 0. It obviously doesn't have dual drive or anything like that, so you can't you can't hope for that to help. But if you're trying to target the Rogo, if you ever see one in game, which you may do, just shoot the front plates on the front. The flat front plates. Think about like a Panzer, where you have the flat plate where the driver is sat. That's exactly where you want to hit the Rogo, and if you hit it perfectly, you should take out 4 or 5 crew members, depending on how good your splash shell is. But overall, it's a nice tank. It's really well modelled. It's a very good choice for a premium, especially if you go for this idea of the 1.3 heavy tank, and maybe we see something like an OI in future. I really doubt it, especially if it's a premium, but you never know. It may be one of those special event ground force vehicles that we see. But anyway, I'll bring you some more planes and tanks in the next few days. Hope you have a wonderful night or day, depending on where you are, and have a nice one.